Hi pals, let's talk about some shitty books today. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Casey, I do booktube things, and today I want to talk about basically just a check-in of all the horrible books that I've read this year. And I use horrible a little loosely. Some of them are truly horrible and despicable. That's why they get 1 star, and some of them I just didn't enjoy at all and think are actually kind of bad. But let's go ahead and dive into it. So this is gonna be really similar to my 5-star mid-year 5-star check-in video, whatever that was, that they'll be linked down below or up here somewhere or something. And I'm gonna go through a quick rundown of all my 1 stars and 2 stars this year, and then I am going to tell you about 5 random books of these that I've selected. In my 5-star mid-year check-in, whatever it was, I talked about like my 5 favorites so far, but I think that if I tell you my 5 least favorites of the year, then you're just gonna go ahead and get the entirety of my worst books of the year. So we're gonna talk about ones that I randomly selected. Okay, so all of my 1 stars this year were Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak, We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Bervowitz. My 2 stars for the year are Ghost Eaters by Clay McLeod Chapman, The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling, Dead Girls, Essays on Surviving an American Obsession by Alice Boleyn, Hyde by Kirsten White, The Evening Road by Laird Hunt, Fragments of Horror by Junji Ito, Desert Creatures by Kay Chronister, We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis Taylor, Ghost Radio by Leopoldo Gout, Sundial by Katrina Ward, The Postmortal by Drew Magary, The Snowman by Joe Nesbo, and Gwendy's Magic Feather by Richard Chismar. So I'm only going to be talking about my 2 stars in here, primarily because both 1 stars are going to make it to the worst of the year, and that's where I'll talk about them for a little longer. But we're going to start with Sundial by Katrina Ward. This is a horror, and I read it so long ago. Yes, this is following a woman named Rob who has only ever wanted a normal life, and after some incident... Yes, an incident with her oldest daughter, she decides to take her back to her like, not an ancestral home, but the home she grew up in, which is Sundial. It's one of those manors with a name. And she takes her oldest daughter back there to try and help her and figure out some behavioral things, and then spooky, scary things happen from there. I say spooky, scary. This wasn't scary. I don't know what to say about this, except that I really love the color, and I just think that this is very vibrant and it's got a great color choice on it. But it was entertaining. That's about the best I can say about it. I was very interested in reading it. I think the more modern day stuff, it goes back and forth between when Rob was a girl and in the current day. And the current day stuff I didn't find as interesting as I found the stuff from her past. But it just overall, I didn't think it was really well written. I will give this book a little bit of credit because I really had such a problem with The Last House on Needless Street by this author. And while that does some things right, it's also very much teasing a very problematic thing that happens a lot in horror, which is mental health as a twist or as a thing to villainize someone. And while it does treat it with, in Last House on Needless Street, it's not insensitive, and it in fact subverts a lot of those things. I still had a lot of problems with the lead up to that, and this I was worried was going down the same path, that we were going to end up with some big twist of like someone had mental health issues, and that was what was really going on the whole time, and that's not what happens in here, so I am grateful for that. But overall, I didn't find this to be anything special, and in fact, despite being massively entertained by it and really feeling compelled to read it, overall I didn't think this was good, and I did not have a wonderful time with it. The next one I'm going to talk about was the easiest one to grab from my stack, and that is The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This is another horror. This is gothic horror. This is following Jane Shoringfield as she gets into sort of a marriage of convenience with the town's doctor, and then suddenly, finds herself entangled in his past and trying to figure out like what's going on at his creepy manor home, because part of their arrangement is that she is not to spend a night in his home. This I was so looking forward to because I loved The Luminous Dead from this author. I think about it all the time and I really want to reread it, and this was such a letdown. It's It's gothic, yes, but it's also boring, and I find gothic horror to almost never be boring, and this was very boring. Overall, the twists and turns in this I didn't really think were anything special, and I really just find it to be really unmemorable. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this one today is I sometimes forget that I read this year. I read this in January, and it's throughout the year when I see it on my shelves, I'm like, oh, I should pick that up. Oh crap, I actually did. And I didn't really enjoy it. So that's why this one's a 2-star. The next one I want to talk about, I don't have a physical copy of, and that is Dead Girls, Essays on Surviving an American Obsession by Alice Boleyn. This had such promise. This is another one I read in January, and I really thought that this was going to be really good and really enjoyable and something really fascinating and a really big deep dive into something that I think is very interesting, which is the United States' obsession with dead women and particularly women who are killed by serial killers. And this had such promise that it just completely fell flat on its face on. It just was disjointed, and I felt like this could have been completely retitled as An Author's Obsession with Joan Didion and said, I it feels so mean to say, but we spent so much of the book talking about Joan Didion and how much of an impact she had on the author, and that's fine, but I felt like the title I felt like the title was a I don't know the word. I feel like the title was really misleading into what this collection of essays was ultimately going to be about, which was just the author going off on various tangents, which is fine and often what book of essays are, but I thought that there would be more cohesion to this, and there just wasn't. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is Desert Creatures by Kay Chronister. First and foremost, this is a staggeringly beautiful cover. I think that this is so good and it's so fun, and I think it really does a great job of encapsulating what the book is ultimately going to be about, because if you read the book, there are a lot of nods in here to what you're going to see. That being said, this was so ultimately flat. It wasn't boring or uninteresting or poorly written even. I just felt it was so flat. This is a story primarily following Magdala, who is a young girl at the beginning of this book, and we see her through different stages in her life throughout the rest of the book. And she and her father live in a place that has been devastated by ecological horror. And it is a little post-apocalyptic, a little bit dystopian, and it seems like it would do a lot of things really well, and ultimately they just were really flat. It was really flat. I don't have a better way to talk about this. I listened to the audiobook for this, and it was fine. I think the narrator did a really great job, but ultimately that really couldn't bring it back for me. And I really wanted this to just be more interesting. I think the first portion of this, maybe the first half, is actually a lot more interesting than the second half. I found the second half to really start to slog, and I thought it just tried to add in a bunch of elements that I thought were really unnecessary to the story. But that's just my opinion. And the last one I'm going to talk about today is one I don't have a physical copy of, and it's Ghost Eaters by Clay McLeod Chapman. This is another one I read way back at the beginning of the year. In fact, I think this was the second or third book that I finished this year. And I'm just pulling on my memory here, so let me give you a quick synopsis. This is a horror that is following a young mid-20-something as she's trying to struggle with her life and with her life choices and where everything has led her, and she finds out that a dear friend of hers has died of an overdose, and she begins trying to find out what happened to him, and then ghosty spooky things happen. I say that a lot when I don't want to give anything away. I will give this book credit. This had some scenes in it of just pure body horror and terror that I thought were so fucking good. I would literally be walking on a treadmill at the gym and then have to stop it and just shiver or just stare off into space for a moment because it freaked me out so much. And not a lot does that. So good job, this author. But ultimately, I just felt this was just about unlikable people who just weren't compelling to read about. I have no problems with unlikable narrators or people just in general that are really unlikable in a story. This just wasn't interesting to me. I think that where this went got to be so nonsensical by the end of it. I was so tired of it. I thought it was crazy where it ended up going, and I felt like it just completely lacked a good resolution. And again, I think that, you know, open endings or anything that doesn't feel fully resolved can often be super impactful. And unfortunately in this one, I really just wanted to wrap it up so it made me feel better about spending my time listening to this. Okay, that's it. Thank you for joining me today, talking some shit about some books. I would love to know what books you've hated this year if you want to leave a comment down below. And speaking of that, please feel free to do algorithm things if you want, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you next Friday. Bye.